Hi guys, some people who don't listen to some of the videos I've made about Japanese swordsmanship and katanas and iaido and so on think that I'm bashing on, very American expression there, but bashing on Japanese swords and swordsmanship, which I'm not at all. Okay, I have great respect for kenjutsu and iaido, and I think it's very, very interesting. However, what I am bashing on is the bullshit essentially that people buy into on the internet and say lots of things from a point of ignorance about Japanese swords and Japanese swordsmanship in relation to other styles of swordsmanship that are just not true. Okay, and they take Japanese swords and swordsmanship out of perspective and out of context, and think it's something magical, which of course it's not. However, one of the things, and I've mentioned this in a previous video, one of the things that I've spent some time doing is looking for European descriptions and accounts of Japanese swords and Japanese swordsmanship. And you know what? In 18th and 19th century British literature and American literature, the Japanese sword is regarded very, very highly. Okay, it was regarded very highly by probably 95% of the accounts that I've come across, both in terms of its construction quality, its beauty, and also its effectiveness. And sharpness and general hardness of edge, and ability to retain an edge, and just quality. So the sword itself was regarded very highly. In terms of the swordsmen, they were also regarded very highly. And I've got a couple of examples here which are featured in Swordsman of the British Empire by D.A. Kinsley, with an introduction by yours truly, which I often reference, but it's just got so much material in it I could probably just make videos based on this for the rest of my life, but I won't, don't worry. And I'm going to give just a few quotes out of this. The first couple are just about general passing comments about the effectiveness of Japanese swordsmen. The first one is from 1902 by William Blakeney of the Royal Navy, and he's quoted as saying, "A Japanese swordsman was a truly terrible antagonist," terrible as in frightening antagonist, and he says, "The thrust is not taught in their fencing school, but there is nothing in the swordsmanship in the world more terrible than the long sweeping cut which they're taught to deliver with lightning-like rapidity." They also go on. There's another one from 1912, very similar, and there are also descriptions of what we would now call iai, or striking from the sword being sheathed or scabbarded, as we've spoken about in previous videos. And here we go. It says this is from 1900 by Alexander Michi in the book called The Englishman in China, but talking about the Japanese here. And he says, "The sword is always carried at the side, and adepts in the use of it wound the moment it is drawn. The fatal stroke upwards is given in the act of drawing, and if the assailant is not disabled in the act, it's too late for defence." There's another one here from 1870, an earlier one by the Reverend J.G. Wood. And he says, "They have a very dangerous cut which is made by the mere motion of unsheathing the sword, and takes effect at a distance where an inexperienced person would have thought himself safe." So there we go. There's just a sample of 3 quotes there talking about Japanese swordsmanship. And in fact, on the Scholar Forum which I run, I've also given many examples, in fact, of descriptions of Japanese swords in old 19th century British and American sources, and they're always very, praising of the swords. There is only one, off the top of my head, there's only one source I can remember from about I think it's about the middle of the 19th century, about 1850s, 1860s, I think, where it describes a Japanese sword as not being of very good quality. But it starts off talking about how when they were in port in Japan, a lot of the sailors or officers and civilians were trying to buy Japanese swords as mementos and souvenirs. But then it goes on to say that one of these on board, they had a Japanese sword and they tested it against a Wilkinson sabre, and in actual fact the Japanese sword got chipped and the Wilkinson didn't show any sign of damage whatsoever. So who knows, maybe it wasn't a very good Japanese sword, or maybe it was quite a very hard and brittle edge and they were using it in a way that Japanese swords are maybe not supposed to be used. Who knows? But it is an interesting little quote from a period when swords were still being used anyway. So there we go. European sources in general are quite highly praising of Japanese swords and of Japanese swordsmen, and in fact I won't read it because it's quite a long account. There's another long passage in here describing about if you're travelling, or if you're a soldier in port, and if you're travelling in Japan in the mid-19th century, when the samurai was still sort of around, the last of the samurai, it was very important to carry a pair of revolvers because, and this is assuming that you're not a fantastic swordsman, basically because the guys carrying swords were so dangerous, they said you wanted to carry a pair of revolvers on yourself just to defend yourself, just in case. So you know, Japan was still quite a quite a medieval kind of lifestyle in some parts of rural Japan in the mid-19th century, before modernisation, and so it was a dangerous place, and you know, these guys were still having sword duels, and still until quite late, yeah, fatal ones, and of course Japanese swordsmen of various sorts. I won't say samurai because they weren't. They were generally just mercenary soldiers. Were involved in various activities in colonial warfare. For example, they used to hire out their services to pirates in places like Thailand and Borneo and places like this. So in fact British, American, French and probably Prussian as well, and Dutch, and probably Portuguese and Spanish as well. European forces in general used to encounter Japanese swordsmen, not always when they were in Japan, but often just like when they were on their activities in Asia, you know, in Southeast Asia particularly. So there we go. Japanese swords and swordsmen were very highly regarded in the 19th century. Cheers!